A heavy cream-colored envelope, its edges glinting faintly with gold embossing, lay on my kitchen table. It stood out like a beacon among the stack of bills, store flyers, and dull envelopes that I usually tossed aside without much thought. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. The paper looked expensive, the kind of stationery people use for important events, not for everyday chatter. I didn't need to pick it up to know who had sent it, because even from where I sat, the shape of the letters on the front felt familiar. When I finally slid it closer, the handwriting struck me at once. Those letters, steady and careful, curved with precision. Miles's hand, my son's. He had always written like that, neat and exact, as though he believed the whole world should stay in order. Even as a child, he lined up his toys by size, his pencils by color, never leaving a thing out of place. I used to joke that he would make a fine architect, though he never laughed much at my jokes. Still, it was strange, more than strange, to see a letter from him. Strange because these days people don't send letters at all, and strange because my son hadn't sent me anything, not even a postcard, in a long time. Miles was the type to call, or at least to text. He hadn't spoken to me in half a year, not since Christmas, not since I opened my big mouth again and spoiled the evening. 6 months of silence, and now here was this envelope. I told myself not to be an old fool, but that's what I've always been. I never learned the art of shutting up when it mattered. My tongue always ran ahead of my heart. At last, I opened the flap and pulled out the thick sheet of paper. It crackled faintly in my fingers as I unfolded it. The words inside seemed almost unreal. Miles Witcher and Duffy Maroro invite you to share in their joy. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My son was getting married, and I, his father, was learning about it the same way strangers did, through an official invitation. No quiet talk at the kitchen table, no phone call with excitement in his voice, not even a knock on my door. Just a card, a beautiful card, yes, but one sent out by the dozens, one of many. I sank down into my old rocking chair, the same one that had followed me through 30 years of life and creaked with my every movement, and poured myself a stiff whiskey. Neat. No water, no ice. That chair had been with me longer than any person had, and at moments like this, its worn wood seemed to know my disappointments. Irwin, my only friend worth naming, always said I was too attached to the past. He might have been right, but what else could I cling to? At 65, a man cannot simply throw out his habits and start fresh. My house, standing lonely on the outskirts of Twin Falls, hadn't changed since the day Agatha walked out 2 decades ago. Same couches, same curtains, same pictures on the walls, and those pictures, always Miles. Miles at 5, his face bright with pride beside a bicycle too big for him. Miles at 12, holding his first fishing rod with the seriousness of a young man who believed he had conquered the river. Miles at 18, dressed sharp in a graduation suit, already looking at me with irritation simmering under his skin. That expression had stayed with him through the years. I remembered Agatha's words the day she left. Suitcase in hand, standing at the doorway, her voice flat. "I'm tired, Herman. I can't go on like this. You never change." And she was right. I had been hard, difficult, quick to temper, dissatisfied with the world and often with the people in it. Miles had stuck with me longer than she did, but only because he needed my money for college. After that, he went his way. A crack in our relationship grew wider and wider until it was a chasm. I sipped the whiskey again and studied the invitation. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Not much time to get used to the idea. Not much time to imagine my son tying his life to a woman whose name I had never once heard spoken in my presence. Duffy Maroro. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had Miles hidden her from me? The next morning, I couldn't stand it any longer. I decided I had to call him. Pride is a stubborn beast, but loneliness is worse, and age makes both heavier. It wasn't easy to admit even to myself that I missed him, that the silence hurt. Our last words had been sharp, my criticism of his work biting deeper than I meant it to. He had been a water inspector for years, and I told him he was wasting his potential, that he should have joined me in the construction business. He hated that conversation. He hated me for pushing. Still, I dialed. 5 rings later, his voice came through, strained but familiar. "Hi, Dad." The words caught in my throat, but I forced them out plain. "I got your invitation." No need for false pleasantries. I'd never been good at them. "Congratulations." "Thank you," he said, cautious, like he was waiting for me to ruin things again. "You could have told me sooner," I said, the words sharper than I intended. "For instance, about the engagement." There was silence on the line, then a long sigh. Duffy and I decided to take it slow. After I proposed, we didn't see any reason to wait. "How long have you known her?" "About a year," he said. "She works in city administration. We met during a meeting on water supply in the new district. A year. 12 whole months. And not a single word to me." It stung, but I tried not to let it bleed into my voice. "I wish I'd met her before you married her." Another pause. I could almost see him fumbling with his thoughts. Then, at last, "Yes, of course, we can meet this weekend. Come over for lunch on Saturday." I agreed, though unease lingered in me like a shadow. I had always preferred others to come into my space, into my house where I felt in control. But this time, the choice was not mine. Saturday came. I stared at my closet longer than I cared to admit, finally pulling out the dark blue suit I used to wear to business meetings. Most of my clients had long since stopped needing formalities, but this felt different, important. I tucked a bottle of good whiskey under my arm and carried a bouquet of flowers for the bride-to-be. Miles's townhouse stood in a new neighborhood of Twin Falls. Neat, well-kept, modern, too modern. Too expensive for a water inspector's salary. I suspected Duffy earned more. A part of me frowned at that. A man should provide, I thought. That was how I was raised. When the door opened, Miles stood there, tense. He tried for a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He shook my hand like I was a client, not his father. "Glad you could make it," he said. The house inside was clean, tidy, but soulless, like a hotel room. A few pictures decorated the walls. One caught my eye. Miles and a young woman with brown hair tied in a tight bun, eyes steady, smile faint. "Dad." "This is Duffy," Miles said as she walked out from the kitchen. "Duffy, this is my father." She wiped her hands on her apron and held out her palm. Her grip was strong, firmer than I expected. Attractive, yes, but her eyes had a cold edge, sharp and calculating. Or maybe that was just my imagination. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Witcher," she said with a smile that didn't quite warm her face. "Miles has told me a lot about you." I doubted his stories painted me kindly, but I held my tongue. I handed her the flowers, which she accepted with polite thanks. Lunch was quiet, stiff. We spoke of weather, of the city's latest news. Not of weddings, not of futures. Miles and Duffy exchanged glances now and then, a secret language I wasn't part of. I felt like a guest in their world. Finally, I broke the silence. "Tell me about the wedding. Where are you planning on having it?" "River Valley," Duffy said. "It's a country club with wide grounds, beautiful place." I knew it well. My company had once built an addition there. "Not cheap," I muttered, sipping the cheap supermarket wine they'd set on the table. "We'll manage," Miles said quickly, his voice dry. "How many guests?" "About 150, Duffy answered, pride flickering in her tone. I nearly choked. River Valley, 150 guests. That was no small sum. "And you've already paid?" I asked. A glance passed between them. "We put down a deposit," Miles admitted. The rest is due before the ceremony." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, Dad, I wanted to talk to you about it. We need help with the funding." And in that moment, I understood. That was why I'd been remembered. That was why the envelope had come. Not for family, not for reconciliation, but for money. "How much?" I asked, steadying my voice. 30,000, he said, holding my eyes. "We'll cover the rest." I could have reminded him of my offer last year, the job in my company at double his salary. I could have asked why he wanted such a lavish wedding he couldn't afford. I could have demanded to know why his fiancée, with her city government, job wasn't covering more, but I didn't. Because despite it all, despite every argument, every silence, he was my son. My only son. "Okay," I said at last. "I'll help." Miles looked at me, startled. He had expected a fight. "Really? Just like that?" "You're my son," I told him. "Of course I'll help." And in that instant, I saw something flicker across Duffy's face. Disappointment. Like she had been waiting for me to refuse, waiting for a scene that would confirm all the things she believed about me. Or maybe she wanted Miles to turn his back on me for good, but I wouldn't give her that. "What's more," I said, my voice firmer now, "I want to pay for the whole wedding. Consider it my gift." "Mr. Witcher, with all due respect, Miles and I would like to handle some matters ourselves. This is our wedding after all." "Of course," agreed, though my insides were tight with irritation, Saraki. "But since I'm paying, I'd like to make sure it's spent wisely. It sounds like you don't trust our judgment." Her voice grew colder. "I just want to make sure everything goes perfectly." I tried to speak calmly. "I have more experience in organizing events. A wedding isn't a business meeting," she countered. "It's a personal event, and Miles and I wanted to reflect our tastes and preferences." "Duffy." Miles intervened, seeing that the conversation was getting heated. "Dad just wants to help. Help is when you ask what the people you're helping want," she said. "It's not about imposing your opinion." I felt anger boiling up inside me. All my life, I'd worked hard, built a business from scratch to support my family. And now this girl who'd only known Miles for a year dared to tell me how to help my own son. "You're right, Duffy." I forced myself to smile. I was getting too carried away. "Of course you have the final say." She nodded, clearly not believing my sincerity. Miles looked grateful that I hadn't escalated the conflict, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes. He realized that the tension between me and his fiancée was growing by the day. That night I called Irwin and told him about the situation. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked when I was done. "Paying for the wedding of someone who clearly doesn't like you." "She's marrying my son," I replied. "Whether I want her to or not, she's going to be part of my family." "Have you ever thought that maybe she's using Miles?" Wynne asked cautiously. "City government is stable, sure, but it's not that lucrative, and you're a rich building contractor with a single heir." The thought crossed my mind, but I pushed it away. I didn't want to think that my son was so blind that he couldn't see the motive. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But even if I did, what could I do? Stop him from getting married? He's a grown man." "You don't have to pay for the wedding," Irwin suggested. "Let them work out their own financial problems and lose your son for good." I grinned bitterly. "No, Irwin. I've made enough mistakes already. I don't want to add another one." A week before the wedding, there was our rehearsal dinner for the closest people. Miles insisted that I come, although Duffy, judging by her face, was not thrilled with the idea. The dinner was held in a small restaurant in the center of town. Besides me, there were Duffy's parents, a pleasant but rather plain couple from a neighboring town, her older sister and her husband, my ex-brother and his wife, and, to my surprise, Agatha. We hadn't seen each other for several years, and I hadn't expected to meet her here. "Hi, Herman," she said, approaching me with a glass of wine. "It's been a long time." She hadn't changed much. the same short brown hair with graying, the same attentive eyes. Only the wrinkles had deepened, and there was a tiredness in her posture. "Hello, Agatha." I tried to hide my excitement. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Miles is my son," she said simply. "Of course I'm here." Wes sat down at the table. I was between Agatha and Duffy's father, who was a very talkative man. He worked as a mechanic at a car service and kept trying to talk to me about cars, which I didn't know much about. Always hired a driver. Dinner went on until Miles got up to make a toast. He thanked everyone for coming, especially his parents. First his own, then Duffy's. Then he said a few words about how they met, and I couldn't help but notice that there were a lot of omissions and loose ends in his story. After him, Duffy stood up. She, too, thanked everyone, especially her parents, for their support. She mentioned me in passing, saying something about generous financial assistance. It sounded like I had bought my own seat at their wedding. Toward the end of the evening, when everyone was already relaxed from the wine, the conversation turned to the newlyweds' plans. After the wedding, Duffy mentioned that they were thinking about buying a house. "We really like the Pine Hills neighborhood," she said. "There are great schools there." "Schools?" I asked. "Are you planning on having children?" "Of course," Duffy said. "We both want a big family." I glanced at Miles, who looked a little embarrassed. He had never told me that he wanted many children. On the contrary, he'd often said when he was younger that he wasn't sure if he even wanted to become a father. "Pine Hills is an expensive neighborhood," I remarked. "Houses there cost at least $500,000. "We know," Duffy smiled, "but it's a good investment." "And how do you plan to finance such a purchase?" I asked bluntly. "As far as I know, none of you have such funds." Miles threw a warning glance at me, but it was too late. "Actually," Duffy replied coldly, "I have some savings and we can take out a mortgage on your paychecks." I raised an eyebrow skeptically. I doubt the bank would approve that much. "Dad," Miles intervened, "let's not discuss it now." "And when?" I couldn't stop. "After you've gotten into debts you can't pay off, we'll be fine." Miles cut him off. "It's not your concern, not my concern." I felt the anger rising in me. "I'm paying for your wedding and you don't even consider consulting me about such serious financial decisions." "We don't have to consult you, Mr. Witcher." Duffy looked at me with open hostility. "Just because you're paying for the wedding doesn't give you the right to interfere in our lives." There was a heavy silence at the table. I saw Duffy's parents exchange concerned glances. Agatha Puther, hand on my shoulder as if trying to reassure me. "Herman," she said quietly. "Not now." I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I'm just worried about you." "We appreciate your concern," Duffy replied, though her tone said otherwise. "Shaquano. But we can work out our own problems." The rest of the evening passed in a tense atmosphere. I could feel the judgmental stare and tried not to interfere with the conversation anymore. When everyone started to leave, Agatha took me aside. "You never change, Herman," she said with a slight sadness. "You always think you know best." "I just want to protect my son," I objected. "Is that a bad thing?" "Sir, he's 32, she reminded me. "He doesn't need protection. He needs your support, not control." I wanted to say that my support was the $50,000 I was going to spend on their wedding, but I didn't. Agatha wouldn't understand anyway. I tried to talk to Miles before I left, but he was cold. "We'll talk after the wedding," he said. "There's too much to do right now." I nodded, feeling the distance between us, which seemed to have started to shrink, grow again. On the way home, I wondered if I'd made a mistake in agreeing to finance this wedding. Maybe Irwin was right, and I shouldn't have gotten involved. But it was too late. All the bills were paid, the invitations had been sent out, and the guests were getting ready to arrive. I could only hope that everything would go smoothly on the day of the wedding. that I would be able to keep my temper and not ruin the most important day in my son's life, that maybe this day would be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, a warmer and more trusting one. But hand on heart, I didn't believe it. Too much water had passed, too deep a rift between us. And now there was Duffy, a woman who seemed to see me only as a source of money and trouble. A woman who would probably be the mother of my grandchildren, but would never treat me like family. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking about the upcoming wedding and what it might bring. I didn't realize that in a week's time, an event would take place that would change our entire relationship forever. An event that would show the true faces of everyone involved in this family drama, including myself. After the wedding rehearsal dinner, I spent several sleepless nights. My thoughts revolved around the same thing. Duffy clearly didn't want me in her and Miles's lives. I could feel it in every look she gave me, in every phrase she dropped, as if by accident. Generous financial aid, the word still echoed in my head, as if all I could give my son was money. On Monday, I met Erwin at his plumbing supply store. He was going through some catalogs when I walked in, and he knew right away from me face that something was wrong. "You look like crap," he said instead of greeting me. "Trouble with the wedding." I sank heavily into a chair by the counter and told him what had happened at dinner. Erwin listened without interrupting, only nodding and frowning occasionally. "I told you to stay away while," he said when I was done. "That girl can't stand you." "But why?" I threw up my hands. "She doesn't even know me." Erwin shrugged. "Maybe Miles said some things to her. You know how kids can exaggerate the sins of their parents? I did." I remembered Miles telling his friends when he was a teenager that I was a tyrant and a desperate when, in fact, I was only demanding discipline and responsibility from him. I suspect he complained about me to Agatha all the time after the divorce, too. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked, thinking out loud more than expecting advice. "What can you do?" Erwin sighed. "The wedding is in 6 days. Everything's paid for. The guests are invited. All that's left to do is go there, smile, and keep my mouth shut. You don't think I can do it, Herman?" Erwin looked at me with a soft reproach. "I know you 30 years. You've never been able to keep your mouth shut when you think you're right." He was right, and it made me angry. All my life I'd said what a thought without caring how others would take it. Agatha hated that trait of mine. "You're insensitive, Herman," she used to say. "You never think about other people's feelings." The next day, I received a phone call from Miles. His voice sounded strained. "Dad, we need to talk about the wedding." Of course, I tried to speak calmly, though I felt tight inside. "Did something happen?" "No, really," he paused. "It's just Duffy thinks it would be better if you weren't part of the ceremony." "What?" I felt the blood rush to my face. "What do you mean left out?" "She thinks it would be less stressful if you just came as a guest. No speeches, no toasts. You know, I understood too well. She wanted me to be invisible at a wedding that I paid for myself." "And you agree with her?" I asked, trying to hold back my anger. "Mile aside. I just want everything to go smoothly, Dad. No conflict." "And you think that pushing me aside is going to accomplish that?" "I'm not pushing you aside." He sounded annoyed. "I'm just asking you to understand the situation." "What situation?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "The one where your fiancé, whom I've only seen a couple times in my life, decides what role I should play in my only son's wedding. A wedding that I'm paying for in full, by the way. That's what I'm talking about." He sounded tired now. "You keep bringing up money as if it gives you the right to tell us what to do." "I'm not telling you what to do," I countered. "I just want Toby a part of your life, Miles. Your wedding. You will be, just without too much attention." I felt my insides boiling. Extra attention. I'm the father of the groom, for crying out loud. "Sha, you know what?" I finally said. "Do what you want. I'll come and sit quietly in the corner and leave when it's over. Is that okay with you?" "Dad, don't be like that," he said, a hint of guilt in his voice. I'm just trying to find a compromise. No, Miles. It's not a compromise. Compromise is when both sides make concessions. And here I'm the one who has to give in. Like always. Always. Now, there was a clear anger in his voice. Shuramont, when did you ever give in, Dad? You've always insisted. Always thought you knew best. Even now, you can't just accept that this is our wedding and we get to decide how we spend it. That hit harder than I expected. Deep down, I knew he was right, but it was beyond me to admit it. Okay, I said after a pause. I understand. I'll just be a guest. Ah, thank you. There was no gratitude in his voice, only relief that the conversation was over. I'll see you on Saturday. I hung up the phone and sat for a long time, staring at nothing. In the evening, I called Agatha. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed someone who knew us both well enough. Did you hear? I asked when she answered. They didn't want me to be part of the ceremony. Yes, Miles called me. Her voice sounded tired. He's upset, Herman. He's upset. I raised my voice involuntarily. What about me? I'm sitting here writing checks for $50,000 and I'm told to keep quiet and keep my head down. Not everything is measured in money, Agatha said softly. It's more important to Miles that you and Duffy get along. How can I get along with her if she won't see me? Have you tried? Really tried? There was no judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity. I wondered, had I really tried to have a relationship with Duffy? Or had I been suspicious of her from the start, as if she were the person who'd come to take my son away from me? I don't know, I answered honestly. Probably not. Maybe it's not too late, Agatha suggested. Try to talk to her, but don't start with complaints, but just talk. I promised to try, though I doubted I'd succeed. The next day, I called Duffy and suggested we meet for lunch. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a small cafe near her work. The conversation didn't go well at first. She was tense, and I felt awkward. But gradually, the ice began to melt. I told her a few stories about Miles, the child, and she shared how they met. By the end of the meal, we weren't the best of friends, but at least we could talk without obvious hostility. Mr. Witcher, she said as we said our goodbyes, I appreciate your support of the wedding, but please understand it's important to us that this day be ours without conflict. I understand, I said, swallowing my pride, and I promise not to cause any problems. The tension seemed to subside a little, but it was a temporary calm before the storm. 2 days before the wedding, Miles called me in a rage. Dad, did you change the order for wedding flowers? And the menu and the musicians? What? I was genuinely confused. Of course I didn't. Why would I do that? I don't know. He sounded distrustful. Maybe because you're unhappy about being sidelined. I felt anger rising inside me. Do you really think I would sabotage your wedding after I paid a lot of money for it? Then explain why all the contractors are saying they got new instructions from you, that there would be yellow chrysanthemums instead of white lies, a DJ instead of an orchestra, and a barbecue instead of a gourmet dinner. I was shocked. Someone was clearly trying to ruin the wedding, and they were doing it in my name. Miles, I swear I didn't change anything. Someone's trying to break us up. Who? He asked skeptically. Who would want to do that? I didn't have an answer. I just knew it wasn't me, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. I'll put everything back the way it was. I promise tonight. Duffy is hysterical, said Miles. She's sure it's your revenge. It's not, I said firmly, and I'll prove it. I spent the next 2 days calling all the contractors and restoring the original orders. It cost me extra money and nerves, but I was determined to make things right. The evening before the wedding, a final rehearsal was scheduled at River Valley. I arrived ready to explain myself to Miles and Duffy, hoping they would believe in my innocence. But as soon as I entered the hall, I realized something was wrong. Miles looked tense. Duffy was avoiding my gaze, and her parents were looking at me with obvious disapproval. "What's wrong?" I asked, approaching Miles. "Someone canceled the limo reservation," he answered coldly. "He called this morning and said that the service was no longer needed." "Guess on whose behalf?" I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Someone was methodically trying to ruin the wedding, and everything was pointing to me. "Miles, it's not." "Me?" I said desperately. "I swear to you." "Then who is it?" He looked at me with defiance. "Who else could have done it?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm going to fix it. I'll order new limos right now." "It's getting late," Duffy intervened, coming toward us. "All the cars in town are booked for tomorrow. We'll take regular cabs." Her voice was accusatory, and I felt my patience wearing thin. "Look," I said, trying to speak calmly. "I realize you think I arranged all this, but why would I do that? I paid over $50,000 for this wedding. Why would I mess it up? Maybe because you didn't get what you wanted," Duffy said sharply. "Because we didn't let you control every detail, didn't let you be the center of attention." "What?" "Sam," I was stunned by her hostility. "I never wanted to be the center of attention. I just wanted to be a part of my son's life." "Part of life or in control of it?" She parried. "There's a difference, Mr. Witcher." "Duffy, please," Agatha intervened, approaching us. "Let's not make things worse." "What situation?" Duffy didn't give up. "The one where the groom's father tries to sabotage our wedding and then pretends he doesn't know what it's about." I felt my insides boiling. I was being accused of something I hadn't done, and no one wanted to hear my explanation. You know what I said? Barely holding back. "I'm tired of making excuses. I didn't change any orders. I didn't cancel any limos. I did everything I could to make this wedding perfect. But if you don't believe me, if you think I'm capable of such pettiness, then maybe I'd better not show up at all tomorrow, Dad." Miles looked confused. "Don't say that." "How am I supposed to say it?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "I'm accused of something I didn't do. I'm excluded from my only son's wedding. And now I'm called a liar. How am I supposed to feel, Miles?" "Serum, we are all nervous." Agatha tried to soften the situation. "Let's take a break and talk calmly. There's nothing to talk about." Duffy cut her off. "The facts speak for themselves." "The facts?" I grinned bitterly. "The only fact is that someone is trying to break us up on the eve of the wedding, and that someone seems to have gotten their way." I turned and headed for the exit. I could hear Miles calling my name behind me, but I didn't stop. I needed to be alone to think about all this. In the car, I called Irwin. "They think it's me," I said. When he answered that, "I'm sabotaging the wedding and you left," he sounded understanding. What was I supposed to do? They wouldn't listen to me. So now what? "You're not going to the wedding?" I wondered. Despite my resentment and anger, I couldn't miss the wedding of my only son. "I'll go," I decided, "Emroy Rysor, but only for Miles." "That's right," Irwin said. "And try not to do anything stupid, old man. Whatever happens, remember this is your son's day." "I know," I sighed. "I'll try to behave." But deep down, I doubted I'd be able to hold it together if Duffy kept blaming me. I was willing to swallow my pride for Miles's sake, but to endure unfair accusations, it was too much. The morning of the wedding day was surprisingly clear and warm for Twin Falls this time of year. I woke up early, long before the alarm clock rang. Sleep had eluded me all night, leaving me alone with heavy thoughts. The events of last night's rehearsal kept me awake, and the bitterness of the unfair accusations still burned inside me. I slowly got out of bed and walked to the window. The sunlight was already playing on the leaves of the trees in my neglected garden. Agatha had once tended it, planting flowers and pruning the bushes. Now it was overgrown, like my life, with the weeds of loneliness. After taking a shower, I stood in front of the open closet for a long time, wondering what to wear. The dark blue, Suit I'd bought especially for this occasion hung on the rack, waiting to be worn. I ran my hand over the expensive fabric, $50,000 for the wedding, another $800 for the suit, and all for what? To be accused of sabotage and told to keep a low profile. Pride demanded that I refuse to attend the wedding. But something stronger? Perhaps the love for my son that I so seldom expressed in words made me put on the suit and tie with trembling hands. At 10 hours, Irving called. "Well, old boy, are you ready?" he asked with feigned cheerfulness. "As ready as I can be," I answered, looking at my reflection in the mirror. A tired face with deep wrinkles around its eyes looked at me with disbelief. "Remember, we agreed." "No scenes," Irwin reminded me. "This is Miles's day. I know. I cut him off. I'm not going to ruin it. I'm going to sit quiet as a mouse and applaud in the right places." "Herman," Irwin's voice became serious. "You're my friend, and I know you better than you think. Promise me you won't do anything stupid no matter what happens." I sighed. "I promise. I'll arrive, sit through the ceremony, drink a glass of champagne to their happiness, and go home. Is that okay with you?" "It's fine," Irwin said quietly. "Do you want me to go with you? Moral support and all that?" "Thanks, man, but I'd rather go by myself." I appreciated his offer, but I needed to go through this alone. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon in the main room of the River Valley Country Club. I arrived a half hour in advance, parking my car farther away from the entrance. I didn't want to run into Miles or Duffy early. The club looked great. Along the walkway to the main building were white columns covered with flowers and ribbons. Waiters with trays of champagne greeted guests at the entrance. I took a glass and took a sip, looking around nervously. Most of the guests I didn't know, apparently friends and co-workers of the newlyweds or Duffy's relatives. A few people nodded at me, but no one came up to talk to me. Perhaps rumors of my sabotage had already spread. The ceremony room was tastefully decorated. The white lies I'd originally chosen with Duffy, the silver ribbons, the elegant chairs for the guests. At least my emergency calls to the contractors had had an effect. All the changes had been reversed and the original plan restored. I sat in the last row, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. I was bitter to realize that I felt unwelcome at my own son's wedding. When the music started, everyone turned toward the entrance. The first to go were the bridesmaids in soft blue dresses. Then Miles appeared. He looked grown up and serious in his black suit. Our eyes met for a moment, and he nodded at me discreetly, but without obvious hostility. It gave me a faint hope that not all was lost. Then Duffy appeared arm in arm with her father. I had to admit, she looked stunning. The white dress with lace trim emphasized her figure, and a happy smile shone on her face. Looking at her, I could almost understand what my son found in her. The ceremony went smoothly. Miles and Duffy exchanged vows that they had written themselves. In Miles's voice, I heard genuine love and a promise of support. Duffy spoke of partnership, respect, and a future together. Looking at them, I had a strange feeling, a mixture of pride from my son and sadness at the realization that I was never a part of this new chapter of his life. After the ceremony, everyone moved into the banquet room for the reception. I kept to the side, sipping whiskey and watching the guests. Agatha tried to engage me in conversation with some distant relatives, but I politely declined. I didn't want to spoil anyone's mood with my gloomy appearance. When the time came for congratulatory speeches, I tensed up. Despite the agreement that I wouldn't speak, part of me still hoped that Miles would change his mind and invite me to say a few words. The first to speak was Duffy's father, Clyde Maroro. His speech was simple and sincere. He talked about how proud he was of his daughter, how happy he was to welcome Miles into the family. Then it was the turn of Duffy's mother, who cried midway through her speech. After her, the bride's sister spoke, then the groom's best friend. I sat clutching my glass tightly and felt my resentment growing with each speech. Was there really no place for me in this succession of congratulations? Was the father of the groom so insignificant? When all the scheduled speeches were over and the announcer announced the beginning of the dance, something inside me broke. I got up from my seat and, staggering more from emotion than from the drink, headed for the microphone. The host looked at me in surprise but stepped aside. I took the microphone and looked around the hushed room. Miles looked at me anxiously, Duffy with poorly concealed irritation. "Good evening," I began, trying to speak calmly. "For those who don't know me, I'm Herman Witcher, the father of the groom." A whisper ran through the room. Some of the guests exchanged glances. "I wasn't on the list of speakers," I continued, not hiding the bitterness in my voice. "Apparently modern weddings don't listen to fathers anymore." But I'd still like to say a few words. I saw Agatha shake her head, and Miles made a movement as if he wanted to get up, but Duffy held his hand. "Miles," I turned to my son, "I'm proud of the man you've grown up to be. I may not have always been the perfect father, but I always wanted the best for you." There was silence in the room for a moment. I could have stopped there, ended the speech on a positive note, but something inside, the part of me that always said what I thought without caring about the consequences, took over. "As for your choice of life partner," I paused and turned my gaze to Duffy, "I hope your marriage will be more successful than your wife's previous relationships." Shocked gasps rippled through the room. Duffy's face turned pale and then flushed. "What do you mean?" she asked sharply, rising from her seat. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't stop myself. "Well, rumor has it that your breakup with Edward, Leighton wasn't as amicable as you say. They say you left him as soon as you found out that his father had gone bankrupt. I found out about it by accident from an acquaintance who worked with Duffy's ex-fiancée's father. The story was old, and I wasn't sure of the details, but it seemed like an appropriate weapon at the time." "How dare you?" Duffy jumped to her feet. Her eyes were throwing lightning bolts. "You know nothing about my life. I know enough," I countered. "I know that you've skillfully manipulated my son, alienating him from his family. I know that you didn't want me in your life from the beginning." "Because you're toxic," Duffy shouted. "You control, you criticize, you humiliate. Look at you. You can't even behave at our wedding." The hall fell into shocked silence. Miles finally got up and stood between us. "Dad, that's enough." His voice sounded tired and disappointed. Please go away." "Are you choosing her side?" I asked, feeling my heart clenched with pain. "Against your own father?" "There are no sides here, Dad," Miles answered. There's only you ruining our wedding with your unfounded accusations." "Unfounded?" He grinned bitterly. "She's been turning you against me from the very beginning." "And she succeeded." "No one turned me against you." Miles shook his head. "You ruined everything. Your selfishness, your inability to respect other people's boundaries, and now you're doing it again." His words hurt more than any physical impact. I stood there stunned, feeling the judgmental stares of everyone present. "Herman." Agatha came over and gently took my hand. "Let's go. You need to cool down." I pulled my hand out and looked around the room. Duffy's parents were looking at me with undisguised hostility. Miles's friends with confusion and embarrassment. Duffy looked at me with triumphant rage, as if I just confirmed everything she thought about me. "Okay," I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. "I'll leave. I hope you'll be happy without me." I turned around and headed for the exit. No one tried to stop me. As I passed the gift table, I noticed a white envelope with my name on it. Inside was a thank you card for helping me organize the wedding, a thank you that now seemed like a mockery. In the parking lot, I got into my car and sat for a long time without starting the engine. My hands were shaking, my head was buzzing from the drink and the humiliation I'd experienced. I had never felt so rejected, so unwanted in my life. The wedding I'd paid for was behind me, the son I raised, a future that obviously had no place for me. And then it hit me. If they don't want me at their wedding, if they think I'm a liability, why do they need my help? Why do they need my money? I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my bank. Thanks to my preferred customer status, I had access to a personal manager even on weekends. Minus Mr. Witcher, what can I do for you? A polite female voice answered the phone. I need to cancel a number of payments, I said, feeling a cold resolve growing inside. All payments related to my son's wedding. Sir, are you sure? The manager sounded worried. Some transactions have already been made and canceling them could incur penalties. I don't care. I cut her off. Cancel anything else that can be canceled and block future charges on those accounts. For the next 15 minutes, I listed the payments that needed to be stopped. The restaurant for catering the banquet, the photographer for the rest of his work, the musicians, the decorating service for removing the decorations, anything that hadn't already been paid in full. When I was done talking, my heart felt empty. I knew I was being petty and vindictive. I knew I could ruin my relationship with my son with this move, but resentment and anger clouded the voice of reason. It started the car and drove out of the parking lot, not looking back at the festively lit clubhouse. I spent the entire drive home in grim silence, going over the day's events in my head. Every word I'd said, every look I'd gotten. At home, the first thing I did was pour myself a double shot of whiskey and sit down in my favorite chair. I turned off the phone. I didn't want to hear Agatha's reproach or Miles's indignation when they found out about my actions. But an hour later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't going to open it, but the persistent ringing didn't stop. Finally, I got up and went to the door. Standing on the doorstep was Duffy. Her perfect wedding hideout was disheveled, her makeup smeared with tears. She looked absolutely shattered. "What do you want?" I asked coldly, not inviting her in. "Why did you do it?" Her voice shook. "Why did you cancel the payments? Why did you kick me out of the wedding? I parried from a wedding I paid for. It was your own fault," she exclaimed. "You ruined everything with your accusations, and you ruined it by turning my son against me." I crossed my arms over my chest. "We're even." Duffy took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm down. "Soon." "Look, Mr. Witcher," she said, changing her tone to a more conciliatory one. "I understand you're hurt. But think of Miles. It's his day, too. The restaurant owner is threatening to call the police if we don't pay the bill. The photographer refuses to give us the pictures. Everything's falling apart." I saw tears in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt a prick of conscience. But then I remembered the way she looked at me in the hall. How easily she supported the decision to kick me out. "I'm sorry. I didn't know," she continued, seeing my silence. "I didn't know that you were so important to Miles, that your presence means so much to him. I thought I was doing the best I could, protecting our wedding from conflict. It's too late to apologize," I said, feeling a cold satisfaction growing inside. "You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. But all those people," she sobbed. "It's not their fault. The waiters, the musicians, they'll get their money," I said. "From you or from Miles or from your parents. Anyone can pay those bills, but not me. We don't have that kind of money." There was desperation in her voice. "You know that. Then maybe you should have thought of that before planning a wedding you can't afford." I started to close the door and before pushing away the only person willing to pay for it. "Please." Duffy put her foot down, keeping the door from closing. Miles was desperate. He never meant for things to turn out this way, but he did nothing to prevent it. My voice sounded hard. "He let you kick me out. He took your side against your own father. Let him deal with the consequences of his choices." "Now, what should I tell him?" she asked, wiping away her tears. I looked at her, a young woman, in a ruined wedding dress and smeared mascara, and felt a strange mixture of compassion and vengeful satisfaction. "Tell him that his father has finally realized the lesson you both tried so hard to teach me," I replied. that I've finally realized my irrelevance in your life and decided to leave it completely. No more money, no more support, no more interference. You got what you wanted. Freedom from me. Enjoy it." With those words, I slammed the door shut, leaving Duffy sobbing on the doorstep. I heard her knocking and calling for a few more minutes, but I didn't open it. Instead, I went back into the living room, poured more whiskey, and sat in a chair, staring at nothing. I knew what I'd done was cruel. Knew I'd probably ruin my relationship with my son forever. But in that moment, the pain of rejection and humiliation was stronger than any rational thought. I sat in the silence of my empty house, listening to the rain begin to fall outside the window, and thought about how the loneliness that had been my choice for years was now my destiny. I spent the first 2 days after the wedding in a voluntary information vacuum. My phone remained off, my computer untouched. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to see pictures of the happy newlyweds, didn't want to know how they got out of the unpaid bills situation. It didn't concern me anymore. On the 3rd day, Erwin rang the doorbell since I didn't answer the phone. I didn't open it right away, not until after the 10th ring when it was clear. He wasn't leaving. "You look lousy," he said instead of greeting me, glancing at my unshaven face and wrinkled house clothes. "Thanks for the compliment." I stepped aside, letting him into the house. "Coffee?" "I'd love some." We went into the kitchen. I put on the kettle and took out 2 mugs, moving mechanically like a robot. "Do you know what's going on in the city?" Erwin asked, watching me. "No." I cut him off. "I don't want to know." "You have to," he shook his head, "because it affects you directly." I sighed, pouring coffee into mugs. "Come on, spill it." "You're not going to let up," Erwin coughed. "The wedding was a nightmare. After you left and canceled the payments, there was panic. The club owner threatened to call the police if the bill wasn't paid immediately. The musicians packed up their instruments and left. Half the waiters did, too. I listened silently, pouring boiling water into mugs. Strangely, I felt no satisfaction from the story, only emptiness. Duffy's parents tried to save the day. Erwin continued. "They put up their savings, but it was only enough to pay for part of the restaurant. Agatha contributed something, too, but you know, a school teacher doesn't make much money." And Miles, the question came out of nowhere. Miles was shocked. First, he couldn't believe you actually canceled the payments. Then he tried to call you. Then, Erwin hesitated. "What?" I put a mug of coffee in front of him. "He went to the bank, tried to get an emergency loan, but they turned him down. Insufficient credit history, insufficient income." I sat across from him, putting my palms around my mug, Asif trying to warm myself with its warmth. All in all, the party was ruined, Erwin summarized. Most of the guests left before dessert. Those who stayed behind helped clean up and tried to comfort the newlyweds. "I felt sorry for them," I said without much conviction. "You do." Erwin stared at me. "Then why did you do it?" I averted my gaze. "You know why? They humiliated me. They made me look like a monster trying to ruin my own son's wedding. And then they kicked me out. And you decided to prove them right?" There was no judgment in Erwin's voice, just tired understanding that you're really capable of ruining everything because of wounded pride. His words hit the mark. I felt a wave of shame rise inside me, but I suppressed it. "They got what they deserved," I said stubbornly. "You can't treat a man like that and then expect him to pay for it." Erwin shook his head. "You and I have known each other too long, Herman. I've seen you push people away, ruin relationships with your stubbornness and inability to admit mistakes. I've seen Agatha leave. I've seen Miles drift away. And all the while, you blamed everyone but yourself. Did you come here to lecture me?" I was getting annoyed. "If that's the case, you can leave. I've heard enough accusations." "No." Erwin took a sip of coffee. "I came as a friend. Because I'm worried about you and because you should know that Miles is still trying to contact you. Why? I snorted skeptically. To tell me what he thinks of me. I have no idea. Irwin shrugged. But he called me 3 times asking if I knew where you were or how to reach you. I was silent, staring at my mug. Part of me wanted to turn the phone on immediately to call my son, but the other stronger part was afraid to hear in his voice the same disappointment and disgust I'd seen at the wedding. Herman Irwin stepped forward. I know you've been through a lot. Your childhood in foster homes, the loss of your wife, all those years building a business on your own. It's made you strong, but it's also made you tough. You're used to being in control of everything because as a kid, you had no control over anything. I shuddered. Irwin was the only person I'd told about my past in full. About being orphaned at 5 years old after a car accident that took my parents' lives. How I'd gone from one foster home to another, never feeling at home anywhere. How I ran away at 14 and lived on the streets until I was taken in by an old construction worker named Otto who taught me a trade and put a roof over my head. That's no excuse, and I said quietly. No, it's not an excuse, Irwin agreed. But it is an explanation. You're afraid to get attached to people because you know how much it hurts to lose the ones you love. So, you push them away first. Enough psychoanalysis. I stood up, picking up the empty mugs. What else do you know about the Miles? Where are they now? He and Duffy are staying with her parents, Irwin answered. The honeymoon was canceled. Apparently, they had to use all their savings to pay part of their wedding debts. I felt a prick of conscience. After all, a wedding was a special day that should be remembered as a happy event, not a disaster. Look, Irwin stood up, getting ready to leave. Just turn on the phone. Talk to your son. Maybe there's still more to come. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what he had said. Finally, I pulled out my phone and turned it on. The device immediately came to life, announcing dozens of missed calls and messages. Most were from Miles, a few. From Agatha, a couple from my secretary. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I wasn't ready to hear my son's voice. Instead, I opened my browser and typed Miles' name into the social media search engine. His profile was private, but I found some photos on the page of one of the wedding guests. Here are Miles and Duffy, happy after the ceremony. Here they are cutting the cake, small and simple, obviously not the one originally ordered. And here are the last shots, the confused faces, the fuss, the waiters collecting the dishes ahead of time. Suddenly, I felt terrible. What had I done? Ruined the most important day of my son's life because of my wounded pride. Because of words spoken in the heat of an argument, because of a misunderstanding that could have been resolved with a calm conversation. I closed the browser and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Images of the past flashed before my mind. Here was Miles at 5 years old, clinging fearfully to my hand on the first day of kindergarten. "Daddy, don't go," he pleads, and I gently unhook his fingers, telling him that men shouldn't be afraid. Here's Miles at 10 proudly, showing me his school project, a model of the solar system. I praise him, but immediately point out the inaccuracies in the location of the planets. The smile slowly fades from his face. Here's Miles at 16 saying he wants to go to art college. "That's not serious," I reply. "Art is a hobby, not a profession. Pick something solid." He argues. I insist. He ends up going into engineering like I wanted, but drops out after the second year. Here's our last big fight before he leaves home. Miles is 23 and has just gotten a job as a water inspector. "It's temporary," he says, while I decide what I really want to do. "When I was your age, I was already managing a construction crew," I reply. "And you're still deciding." He slams the door and doesn't call for 3 months. Every time Miles needed support and understanding, I gave him criticism and expectations. Every time he tried to find his own way, I tried to guide him in my own way. and now I wonder why he was distant. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my bitter musings. Agatha stood on the doorstep wearing a dark blue dress and a determined expression. Finally, as she said when I opened the door, "I thought I was going to have to call the police to see if you were alive. As you can see, I'm alive." I stepped back, letting her in. "To what do I owe this visit?" Agatha walked into the living room, without waiting for an invitation, and sat down in a chair with her back straight. "You know why I've come, Herman. We must talk about what you have done." I sat down across from her, preparing myself for a barrage of accusations. "Come on," I said tiredly. "Spit out what you think. I think you're a selfish, stubborn jackass who can't see beyond your own hurt." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were lightning. "I think you spend your whole life destroying relationships with people you care about and then wonder why you're alone." I wanted to object, but she held up her hand, stopping me. "No, you listen. For years I watched you push Miles, criticize his every choice, undermine his confidence, and when he finally found someone who accepts him for who he is, you couldn't take it. That's not true." I shook my head. "I only wanted what was best for him. And I'm not against Duffy. It's just what?" Agatha interrupted. "Just that she wouldn't let you control their wedding. She wouldn't let you be the center of attention. She turned him against me from the beginning," I countered. "She saw me as the enemy before she even recognized me." "Did you give her a chance to recognize you?" Agatha looked at me defiantly. "Or did you just assume that she wasn't right for you because she didn't bow to your authority?" I didn't say anything. There was some truth in what she said that I didn't want to admit. "So, what now?" Agatha asked after a pause. "What's your plan? Sit here wallowing in self-pity while your son tries to salvage what's left of his wedding and his reputation?" "Reputation?" I frowned. "Do you have any idea what he's going through right now?" There was a hint of desperation in her voice. "Everyone in town is talking about how the groom's father made a scene at the wedding and then canceled all the payments. People feel sorry for Miles and it's killing him. He was always proud of you despite all your differences." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Miles was proud of me after everything I'd done. "He never told me that," I muttered. "Did you give him a chance?" Agatha shook her head. "You were always so busy pointing out his mistakes that you didn't notice him trying to earn your approval." I remembered how Miles used to show me his work reports, how he used to tell me about the difficult cases he'd managed to solve. At the time, I saw it as an attempt to justify my modest career choice. But what if it was an attempt to show method? He could do it. That he was good at what he did? "I didn't know," I said quietly. "Of course you didn't know," Agatha sighed. "You never listened. You never really listened." We sat in silence. It was starting to rain outside the window, the drops drumming on the glass as if to accompany our conversation. "What should I do, Agatha?" I finally asked. "How can I undo what I've done?" She stared at me for a long moment as if assessing the sincerity of my words. "Start by calling your son," she said. "Listen to him without interrupting. No excuses, no accusations. Just listen. And then, do what you should have done all along. Accept his choices. Accept Duffy as part of his life. And for God's sake, pay the bills for the wedding you promised to fund." I nodded, feeling a lump come up in my throat. "And one more thing, Herman." Agatha rose, preparing to leave. "Try to realize that not everything in this world revolves around you. Sometimes you just have to step back and let the people you love live their lives, even if you think they're making a mistake." She headed for the door but turned around on the threshold. "You know what your problem has always been? You were so afraid of losing control that you controlled everything and everyone around you. And in the end, you lost the most important thing, the love and respect of your own son." With those words, she walked away, leaving me alone with thoughts that stung more than any accusations. I went back into the living room and picked up the phone again. Among the many missed calls were several from an unknown number. I pressed call back on the last of them. After the third ringtone, the phone was picked up. "Hello?" Miles's voice sounded wary. "Hello, son," I said, feeling my voice shake. "It's me, your father." There was a pause so long I thought the connection had broken. "Why did you do it, Dad?" he finally asked. There was no anger in his voice, just tiredness and frustration. "Why did you ruin our wedding and then cancel the payments?" I wanted to justify myself to say that I'd been provoked, that I'd been humiliated and hurt. But I remembered Agatha's words and held back. "I was wrong," I said instead, "and I'm sorry." Silence again. I could almost see Miles trying to make sense of my words. For the first time in my life, I was admitting my wrongness without reservations. "Do you realize what you've done?" There was a hint of anger in his voice. "You didn't just ruin one day. You set us up in front of all the vendors, in front of the guests, in front of Duffy's parents." I know. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of shame wash over me, and I will do everything I can to make things right. I'll reinstate all payments. I'll reimburse any additional expenses. "It's not about money, Dad," Miles sighed. "It's about trust. How can I trust a man who can ruin everything at any moment because of his hurt pride?" His words hit the mark. "After all, that's what I was afraid of all my life. That people would see me as a destroyer, a man incapable of stable relationships. And by my actions, I've only confirmed that fear. I don't know what to say," I said honestly, "except that I'm sorry and I want to make things right if you'll let me." "I don't know, Dad," he said, uncertainty in his voice. "Duffy's really upset. Her parents are too. They've invested all their savings to save the day." "I'll make it up to you," I repeated. If possible, I'd like to apologize to Duffy in person. Adore him." "I'm not sure she'll want to talk to you," Miles replied, "after everything that's happened. I understand, but tell her I'm ready when she is." We talked for a few more minutes. Miles was reserved but not hostile. He promised to think about my offer to meet and said he'd get back to me later. When the conversation ended, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in years, I didn't try to control the situation, didn't insist on my own way, didn't demand immediate solutions. I simply admitted my guilt and offered to help, leaving the choice up to my son. I didn't know if Miles would forgive me, if Duffy would accept my apology. I didn't know if I could ever be a part of their lives. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, faint but real. That night, I sat down at my computer and began writing a letter to my son. A long, frank letter in which I told him about my childhood, about the fears that had haunted me all my life, about how I had tried to protect him from the pain I myself had experienced, but ended up hurting him just as much with my hyper-parenting and control. I didn't know if I would send this letter. I didn't know if I was ready to fully open up, to show my vulnerability. But the writing process itself was therapeutic, as if I was finally peeling away layer after layer of the protective armor I had built around myself over decades of loneliness. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in days. Fallen. Twin Falls was always beautiful. The maple along the streets were a fiery red, and the air was filled with a special freshness that heralded the coming cold weather. I've always loved this time of year for the clarity, for the cleanliness, for the sense of one cycle ending and the beginning of preparation for another. Almost 4 months had passed since the day I'd spoken to Miles on the phone. I've kept my promise. I've reinstated all wedding payments, reimbursed additional expenses, even paid liquidated damages to vendors for the inconvenience. It cost me about $15,000 more on top of the original amount, but money was the last thing I was worried about. Miles and I met Weiss, both times on neutral ground at a downtown cafe. The conversations were tense, cautious. It was as if we were both walking through a minefield, afraid to say the wrong thing that might bring us back to our old feud. Duffy didn't attend these meetings, and I didn't insist. The wound was too fresh, and I realized that some people take longer to forgive. I learned from Irwin that Miles and Duffy did have a modest ceremony at City Hall a month after the failed wedding. Only the closest people were present. Duffy's parents, Agatha, a few friends. I wasn't invited and I didn't take offense. Some bridges can't be rebuilt no matter how hard you try. That September morning I was sitting on Thavre of my house, sipping coffee and going through the business mail when the mailman delivered an envelope. I recognized Miles's handwriting at once, the neat, almost calligraphic letters that had been his hallmark since childhood. My heart thudded as I opened the envelope. We hadn't spoken in weeks, and I didn't know what to expect. Inside was a doubled folded piece of paper, not a card, but an actual letter. "Dear Father," it began, and the formal address made my heart ache. "I'm writing to tell you an important piece of news. Duffy and I have made the decision to move to Portland. I've been offered a position with the Oregon Department of Ecology, and Duffy may transfer to a branch of the city government there. It's a good opportunity for both of us, professionally and personally. The truth is that staying in Twin Falls has become too difficult. Too many people know about what happened at our wedding. Too many whispers behind your back, sympathetic glances, awkward pauses in conversation when your name or the wedding is mentioned. Duffy is having a particularly hard time. Her parents have invested all their savings to save the situation, and now they have to deny themselves many things. Despite your compensation, the moral damage remains. I know you tried to make things right, and I appreciate that. But there are some things that money or apologies can't fix. Trust, respect, a sense of security. All of those things were shattered that day, and restoring them completely is, I'm afraid, impossible. I'm not writing this to blame you or make you feel guilty. I just want you to realize we're not leaving because of work. We're leaving to start fresh in a place where no one knows our history, where we can just be a young family and not the ones who had a disastrous wedding. I'm saying goodbye, but not forgiving. Not yet. Perhaps in time, as the wound heals, we can build some new relationships. But right now, I need to focus on my family, on our future with Duffy. We leave in 2 weeks. If you want to say goodbye in person, let me know. If not, I understand. Respectfully, Miles. I reread the letter 3 times, each time feeling something inside clenched tighter and tighter. Farewell, but not forgiveness. These words felt like they burned themselves into my consciousness. Miles was always precise in his wording, another trait he'd inherited from me, though he'd never admit it. I put the letter aside and stared at the fallen leaves in the garden for a long time, swirling in the light breeze. I remembered how little Miles used to jump in the same piles of leaves, laughing with delight while I stood beside him, smiling and filming him with a video camera. Where are those tapes now? Probably in one of the boxes in the attic, covered in the dust of oblivion, like so many other happy moments in our lives. I decided to meet my son in person. I couldn't let him leave without saying goodbye, without looking him in the eye. We agreed to meet at the same cafe as before. 2 days before they left, Miles came alone, and from his tense posture, I realized that the conversation would not be easy. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said as we ordered coffee. "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye," he replied, looking away from me. "No matter what, you're my father." "Miles." I stepped forward. "I understand why you're leaving, and I won't try to talk you out of it. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for what happened, and I'll wait as long as it takes until you can, if you can ever forgive me." He finally looked me in the eye. "It's not just about forgiveness, Dad. It's about understanding. You've always tried to control my life, to steer me down the path you thought was right. When I resisted, you got hurt, angry, manipulative. The wedding was just the last straw." "I never wanted to manipulate you," I countered. But even to myself, the word seemed insincere. "Really?" Miles raised an eyebrow. What about the time you offered to pay for my engineering college tuition, but refused to support me when I wanted to study art? Or the time you bought me a car for my 18th birthday, but on the condition that I work for your company on weekends? Or when you offered to pay for our wedding and then tried to control every detail? I kept quiet because he was right. I'd always used money and resources as a way to influence, even if I didn't admit it to myself. Yeah, didn't realize it, I said honestly. I thought I was just looking out for you, wanting the best for you. You know what the saddest part is? Miles sighed. I believe you really thought that. But caring is when you help someone become the best version of themselves, not when you try to remake them in your own image. His words hit the mark. All my life, I'd been trying to make Miles into what I wanted to be. Confident, successful, rich. I didn't see that his ideas of happiness and success could be any different from mine. You're right, I admitted. And I'm sorry I realized it too late. Miles looked at me in surprise. He clearly hadn't expected me to agree with his accusations. Well, he said after a pause, maybe it's not too late for you. Maybe you can still make a difference in your life. And for us, I asked, feeling my voice treacherously shaking. For our relationship, he looked away. I don't know, Dad. Honestly, I don't know. Right now I need to focus on my new life, on Duffy. Maybe after a while, but I'm not promising anything. I understand, I said, though my insides were clenching with pain. And I won't push. Just know that I'll always be happy to hear from you when you're ready. When we said goodbye at the cafe's exit, I wanted to hug him, but I didn't dare, limiting myself to an awkward handshake. Miles nodded as if he understood my doubts and walked away quickly without turning around. I watched him until his figure disappeared, around the corner. And for the first time in years, I felt that I was losing something really important. Perhaps the most important thing in my life. When I got home, I sat in my office, and for the first time in a long time, I thought about my future. What's keeping me here? Business. It had long ago become a chore that was not satisfying. Friends, other than Irwin, I had almost none. Reputation, in town. After the scandal at the wedding, it was shoplessly ruined. A sudden thought occurred to me, and the more I thought about it, the more right it seemed. I could start over again in a different place with different people, maybe even a different business. At 65, many people are already thinking about retirement, but I always felt younger than my years and knew I was still capable of so much more. The next day, I took Irwin out to dinner and shared my plans with him. Are you going to sell the company? He looked at me in disbelief. The one you've been building for 30 years? Yes, I nodded, surprised at my own calmness. I have a few potential buyers. Jared Fowler's been wanting to expand his business for a long time. He even made an offer a couple years ago. And the house? Irwin looked around the living room where we were sitting. Are you going to sell that too? That too? I shrugged. Too many memories, Irwin. Good and bad. But most of all, regrets. My friend was silent for a long time, twirling his whiskey glass. Where are you going? He asked at last. I haven't decided yet. I smiled. Maybe the coast. I've always wanted to live by the ocean. Or in the mountains where it's quiet and peaceful, somewhere where no one knows me. What about Miles? Irwin looked me right in the eye. If you leave, how will he find you when he's ready to reconcile? I sighed. If he really wants to find me, he can. I'm not going to disappear without a trace. Just give him space. And myself, too. That's running away, Herman. Irwin shook his head. You've always criticized others for not facing their problems head-on, and now you're running away. No, I objected. It's not running away. It's a conscious decision to start a new chapter. There are too many ghosts of the past here. Too many mistakes I can't undo. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to leave everything behind. Irwin didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue anymore. We talked about other things. His store, the local news, plans for the winter, but when he left, he hugged me tightly, a gesture uncharacteristic of our usually reserved friendship. "Don't disappear, you hear," he said. "Wherever you go, keep in touch. I promise." I patted him on the shoulder. The next weeks passed in a flurry of activity. I met with potential buyers of the business, consulted with lawyers, appraised the house. Everything moved faster than I expected. It was as if fate itself was pushing me to change. Jared Fowler made a good offer for the company. Not the highest offer I had received, but I knew he would keep most of the employees and keep things going. A young married couple from Boise was interested in the house. They had 3 children and were looking for a spacious home in a quiet neighborhood. Seeing them walk through the rooms, discussing where to put the kids' beds and where to set up the playroom was strange, but also right. This house was going to be filled with life, laughter, and a future again. In early November, when all the documents were signed and all that remained was to wait for the final payment, I received a small package. It was postmarked Portland, and my heart throbbed with anticipation. Inside was a simple frame photo of Miles and Duffy in front of Portland's famous "Keep Portland Weird" sign. They were smiling, holding hands, and looking happy. Really happy. The photo was accompanied by a short note. "Dad, we're settling into our new place. The work is interesting. The townie's quaint. Duffy especially likes the local cultural scene. Hope, you're doing well. Miles, no outpouring of feelings, no promises of reconciliation, just a brief report and a discreet wish. But for me, it was more than I'd expected. A first step, a small bridge across the chasm that lay between us. I stared at the photo for a long time, noticing the details. Duffy's new haircut, Miles's relaxed posture, the lack of tension in his shoulders that always appeared when he was around me. They were really starting a new life, and it seemed to be a life they were enjoying. That evening, I wrote back a simple "Thank you for the photo in the news," told him about my decision to sell the business and the house, but didn't mention my plans to move. I didn't want Miles to think I was following him or conversely trying to permanently cut ties, just gave the facts as he did. 3 days later came the reply, a short message on my phone. "Good luck with your new endeavor. Let me know where you settle. Down." 2 weeks later, everything was finalized. The business went to Jared, the house to the young family. I packed the bare minimum: clothes, a few books, photo albums, personal papers. The rest I either sold or gave away. It's amazing how little a person really needs when they decide to make a fresh start. On my last day in Twin Falls, I stopped by the cemetery where my mother was buried, the only person close to me besides Miles that I had ever truly loved. She died 10 years ago of cancer, and I'd rarely visited her grave. Didn't see the point in talking to the stone, but now something was pulling me there. Some need to complete the cycle, to say goodbye not only to the city, but to a part of myself. I stood at the simple headstone with only my name and dates of life engraved on it, and thought about what she would have said about my decision to leave. Would she have supported it, condemn it? Or would she have just shrugged in her usual manner and said, "Do what you think is right, but don't regret it later"? From the cemetery, I went to Irwin's house to say goodbye and leave a new phone number and email address. We had a glass of whiskey, reminisced about old times, and promised to keep in touch. Both of us knew that this connection would fade over time, but we chose not to discuss it. "Are you sure you're making the right choice?" Irwin asked one last time. "No," I smiled, "but I'm sure I can go on living the way I've been living. And that's something." That evening, I walked through the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that had witnessed so much of my life. Strangely, I felt no sadness or regret, just a quiet acceptance of the inevitable and a slight excitement for the unknown future. At dawn the next day, I loaded the rest of my belongings into the car and drove out of town. The sky in the east was turning pink, promising a clear, sunny day. I turned on the radio, tuning it to a classic rock station, and headed down the highway, without looking back. Where was I headed? It didn't matter much at that moment. Probably Oregon. Not Portland, of course, but somewhere on the coast. Or California, where it's warmer, or Montana, where it's vast and quiet. I had time to decide. A road full of possibilities lay ahead, and I felt free for the first time in years. I had no remorse for my actions. Not for what had happened at the wedding. Not for my decision to cancel the payments. Not because I thought I was right, but because I understood without that crisis, I would have never realized how toxic my relationship with my son had been, how destructive my control over his life had been. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what really matters. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to find the strength to push back and resurface. My pride cost me my relationship with my son, but it also ultimately led me to realize the need for change. I didn't know if I would ever see Miles again. I didn't know if he could truly forgive me, if I would be able to be a part of his life, to meet his children if they came along. This uncertainty was painful, but I accepted it as part of the path I had chosen for myself. The only thing I was sure of was that no matter what happened next, I would no longer be the man I had been in Twin Falls. That Herman Witcher, stubborn, controlling, unable to admit his mistakes, was a thing of the past, and so was the town that was growing smaller in the rear-view mirror. Ahead lay the unknown, but there was more hope than fear, and that was probably enough to start with.